post-Marxist. Why he hates capitalism so much, maybe explain there. He died in 2007, which means that compared to a lot of other critical theory authors that people are inclined to read as like sort of source material and not secondary academic material, he saw a lot more sort of modern events. That's why also a lot of the subject of his critique has to do with like more recent policy events, hence his discourse on like the Gulf War and 9/11. He wrote about the vast diversity of topics. One thing to keep in mind is that since he was a sociologist, that's what he studied, that's what he had degrees in, that's what he taught. He was not a philosopher in the very standard sense. There's a general conception that in philosophy, when people assess problems, they're generally also trying to figure out how we can find solutions to those problems, because we're trying to find supposedly some notion of a good life amidst all these issues. However, Baudrillard is a little less concerned about that, because as a sociologist, he was just trying to come up with a detailed analysis of what postmodern life looked like in the stage of late-stage capitalism. He was not looking for a lot of solutions or telling people how to deal with that shit. He was just saying that that's just the state of affairs that was going on. He's best known for his book, Sim and Sim, which is like his magnum opus. A book called America, which was just like a really scathing critique of American culture and civilization. And the Gulf War did not take place, just because it's a very provocative title. But we'll get to that at the end. My favorites are Sim and Sim, and what I think most good debate material comes out of. Sim and Sim, Symbolic Exchange and Death, for the critique of death arguments of his. The Illusion of the End, I think is really good for the core of the material that I'll be talking about. It is very hard to find a PDF of, so I'm working on that. When I can find a really accessible one, I'll make it accessible. And an essay called The Spirit of Terrorism. It's interesting. So before I get into the meat and bones of this, we're going to have to do like a straight run through the six through a bunch of like philosophy, history, and Pomo stuff, just to make sure you understand what's going on. So to understand post-structuralism, you need to understand what structuralism was. Structuralism believed that cultural history could be understood by finding a larger underlying structure that connected reality and abstract ideas. For example, in the instance of, say, Foucault, he thought that this third order that brought these aspects of the world together was power. Post-structuralists said, well, that seems very convenient, that we can just understand all the functions of a society based on one single ideal that sort of connects our ideology and manifestation in the world. It's probably much more varied than that and much more layered. And so they were looking for a more accurate, but probably a much more complex critique. And the main concern was that within structuralism, there was a focus on binary understandings. They were working off of a lot of Hegelian thought, and they thought very dialectically. Post-structuralists were taking after this guy named Derrida, who thought that the notion of meaning from deriving from polar ends was not very good. I'll clarify more about that in a hot second when we talk about semiotics, which is now. Semiotics, what is it? Does anyone know? It's the study of the creation of meaning. It was foremost coined, or not really coined, but I think studied in a critical sense, by this guy, Ferdinand de Saussure. What a guy. And he had a few questions asked. He was asking questions like, how do signs make meaning? And asking questions like, why does a G2 pen and a laptop stand signify that I'm a national circuit debater? Well, there's a good explanation for this. But Baudrillard disagreed with this general framing, so we'll break it down comparatively so you understand the difference. So here's where we understand a few key terms. There's just what signs are. Signs are sort of units of understanding or meaning. They're split into two parts, signifier and signified. In the instance of the example previously given, the signifiers are a G2 pen and a laptop stand. The signified, which is what we think of, the cultural meaning that we attach to those two objects in tandem, which otherwise have no intrinsic meaning outside of the fact that it's literally a pen and a laptop stand. Is the idea of, say, a national circuit debater, probably talking about Baudrillard or something else. The argument for structuralists is that signs make meaning through difference. The laptop stand and G2 pen only have this additional cultural meaning because we can juxtapose them and their context against other settings, like, say, PF debate or national circuit debate, where one may not be so inclined to use like a laptop stand for the lack of spreading errors, etc. But what this ultimately concludes for structuralists is that we create meaning based on our cultural experience. The post-structuralists are a little more pessimistic on this issue and are inclined to say no. A lot of the meanings that we lately carry and have, yeah, maybe you could call that a cultural experience, but most of them are just institutions shoving created meanings down our throat. And so whether you want to call that cultural experience or not is up to you. Baudrillard sort of says, no, that's not a cultural experience, it's a sort of interlay with power. And that meaning was not singular, but instead we should understand these signs and signifiers not as just part and parcel and product of a cultural history, but instead interrelating with each other, constantly changing over time. The meaning of things always being shifted by the images associated with them. Hence, when Baudrillard says, quote, we live in an age with more and more information and less meaning, what he's saying is that the more and more that we have things proliferating, making commentaries on events, on things, on objects, our idea of what that object's meaning is, or the things that they're referencing to, their meanings are constantly shifted and saturated by all the same media representations, things you see on social media about topics, right? They're all latently affecting your understanding of meaning of concepts, of social events, etc., and so forth. The fact that we are getting so many sort of like BuzzFeed and then literally statements about reality means that our understanding of meaning of objects is heavily fluctuating because the grounds by which we determine the meaning of something are also heavily fluctuating. He also argued that signs don't really have any bearing on reality. In a sense, Baudrillard is sort of just like a skepticist. In the sense that if any of y'all are familiar with an argument that's usually in Trick's debate called linguistic skepticism, some have tried to characterize Baudrillard as such, in the sense that he says, well, you know, our linguistic attempts to capture the essence of objects and meaning and understanding always seem to fail. That our notion of a meaning and understanding is very regressive and always trying to slip away from us. This is a common observation that's many people with critical theory. What's more important for Baudrillard is the social statement here, in that the fact that people aren't able to ascertain objectivity about the world on first impression is that this sort of triggers a gag reflex of fear, that people aren't able to interpret the world properly because their perception is just useless to the point of not giving us any grounds of objectivity. This is always the tension that comes with people in philosophy. The German idealists brought this up originally with Kant's metaphysics, that our experience of the world may not be sufficient for us to have a totalized understanding of things. For most people, this scares them, according to Baudrillard. For most people, this leads to them devoting themselves to systems of ideology, things like religion, cultural truths, traditions, things that hold them down to some notion of objectivity and meaning. In the Enlightenment, we would say that people who are very scared of what Nietzsche termed the death of God and the growing amount of nihilism in Europe would say they shifted wave and went over to say things like reason, the institution of reason, Enlightenment rationality, which has preceded us for the rest of Western civilization. But this assumptive view of the dominance of rationality only stems out of the fear that is provoked by the sort of underlying primordial truth of a lack of world rationality. More blocks of text. So, within this large realm of meaning that is differentiated from each other, we try and grasp that singular meaning, constantly confounded, and it's regressed from us. When we try and find out what other signs are pointing to, it constantly goes down the line. There's this joke about Deleuze that people have been saying for many years that's like, when you look at his system of metaphysics of becoming. One like image used to describe it was like a bunch of turtles stacked on top of each other, and so people described it as turtles all the way down. For Baudrillard or Derrida in their views of language, it would just be fuck all the way down. Like, they just don't think like anything points to anything. There's intrinsic meaning in anything. More or less like, yeah, I'm saying a lot of sentences to you. There's a lot of sentences written on the board, but the whole point of this presentation is that none of this means jack shit, according to Baudrillard. So, take that as you will. But, and we'll get more to, like, where it's a little problematic that Baudrillard is so indeterminate later. But, so for example, to clarify what I mean when I say that this sort of meaning is regressive, because I don't want to go too fast on these more complicated aspects, especially in things like semiotics. I feel like people just don't understand that. So, you have, say, let's go back to the sign for national circuit debaters, right? Say, yeah, we can analyze that, right? In a structuralist context, break it down to the components of signification, right? The G2 pen and the laptop stand, right? The point of the post-structuralist is not that this is incorrect, but it's that, what does this have to say? What does this sign have to say in terms of meaning? It seems that this is just loaded with a bunch of other context. This sign just further points to other signs. It doesn't give us any like sort of large objective meaning or big say-so about our culture. This might point to just something like pedagogical settings, something we can infer from it. If we have things like national circuit debaters, then we probably have things like pedagogical settings. And if that's the case, that probably just says that we're a society with some level of education, right? And you can just keep looking at these meanings all the way back, right? But if you went back at it the next day and tried to see like where the rabbit hole goes down, you might find it yourself in a different concept, right? So our notions of meaning of these concepts is always loaded and very subconscious in the sense that when we try and extrapolate and extend what our associated meanings are of these things, it just keeps going in different directions. And this is what I mean when I say that this notion of knowledge and understanding is like a web. So that makes sense so far. Any questions up until now? Cool. And so this is where the theory of hyperreality stems from, a political theory stemming from an epistemic outlook in the first place. Because I want you to understand Baudrillard pretty organizationally, because he's pretty simple, I think, at the end of the day. This is his epistemological argument, which is based in semiotics, right? More or less reduced down to, we don't know jack shit, but we think we do. Hyperreality, instead, is the way that we deal with this. And when we start holding on to all these totems of truth, right, that give us some coherence of the world to make out of it, then what we find ourselves in is in a society of a lot of presumed meaning, right, in the sense that we can communicate with each other because we all presume similar, if not the same meanings, right, because we all have similar education systems, we're taught the same things, for the most part. And at least on the things that are similar amongst us, or similarly known and taught, we can communicate. And that's what creates the illusion of a society that's peaceable. Baudrillard says underlying all of this is that we have a sort of, well, he didn't say this, this would be said after this, but we have a sort of matrix-like situation. Also, just fun fact, the movie The Matrix was inspired directly by Jean Baudrillard. In his book, Simulacrum and Simulation has a cameo in it when Neo is like still in the Matrix at the beginning of the movie as a hacker. He opens up a book on a shelf to give a disc to someone. It's like a false book that just opened and hollow, and it is Simulacrum and Simulation by Baudrillard. The Wachowski brothers are big fans. But hyperreality is just the notion that we have all these projected signs that we agree upon meaning, but they have absolutely no relation to what we call the real. This term, the real, is used a lot in critical philosophy. Can anyone give a jab at what it means?
So, like, the real is this distinction between, like, fantasy and, like, the actual universe that we live in. So, I guess fantasy would be, like, all of the stuff that's hidden that we're, like,
I'd stay away from the fantasy juxtaposition of Baudrillard just because I think it's usually more of a psychoanalytic term.
Okay.
And Baudrillard is a little sheepish to accept psychoanalysis.
Okay, so it's like the real is basically the actual universe that we exist in. So the stuff that's not lied, it's like all the underlying factors that are present within the world. That it's typically that is hidden or covered up, but now is actually like uncovered.
Right. 2 more questions for you. One, do you think that we can have a full engagement with the real? Do you think we can live in the real in its entirety?
Well, I only know like the psychoanalytic portion of it, and I don't think so because I don't think that people can ever like fill their lack or
from a
like
psychoanalytic perspective in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that it's possible to fulfill the real because in order to like fulfill the real, you'd have to break down all of the different signs that exist there.
Yeah,
and
you'd seemingly have to go back to the beginning of time.
Yeah.
But do you think that we can have engagements with it?
Yeah, I think to a certain degree.
Okay.
When we when we uncover truth or what we perceive as truth.
Yeah, okay. So this is sort of what Baudrillard is saying. Baudrillard is saying that we don't have much, if any at all, engagement with the real, that our notion of meaning obfuscates our understanding of the real as it stands now. We'll get into more examples of that with symbolic exchange later. But he says that maybe there are things that we can do to give us a knack at engaging with the real, which is sort of the thesis of the critique. We want to try and get out of hyperreality and maybe have some engagement with the real. How we do that, we'll get into in a hot second. But the argument for hyperreality is that we ultimately end up forming these social enclaves, and they spread. And it seems to be at the state of the world as it stands now. We have some pretty distinct ideological units in terms of, I'd say you probably have like spread, and this is not relational to borders. This is based on ideology. In the West, which is say like most of the European nations, in the U.S., Canada, we have a pretty, neoliberal view of economics and like what is acceptable, and we think globalization is okay, like spreading all those values everywhere. But this imposition of those values on other places, right, where they contradict. Keep in mind that all of these beliefs are picked up in the thought that people will feel secured by having these notions of meaning, right? It is out of an impulse of fear, right, in the first place. So imagine if some other entity comes and tells you all the truths that you've been clinging on to make sense of the world around you are wrong. What do you think occurs? What? Yes, lashing out, violence. We can understand most of modern conflict in the frame of ideology just by saying, well, yeah, if you go over to X place and tell them that everything that they've held on to make sense of the world around them is wrong, yeah, they'll probably try to kill you. And so Baudrillard attempts to explain sort of the unfurling of the 20th and 21st century as he saw it in terms of this sort of framing of conflict, where hyper-realities clash, if you will. The War and Terror, I think, is a good example of this on the ideological difference between, say, like Western Judeo-Christian values in the fundamentalist form spread versus, say, like Islamic values or a certain variant of Islamic values. But ultimately, hyperreality is sustained by something called the symbolic order. The symbolic order is the precise set of truths and meanings that a society carves out and chooses their sort of artificial set of rules, if you will. But however, because they are artificial and not really based in much relation to the real, right? They're just have value by virtue of us willing that they have value, in the same sense that like fiat currency has value by the notion that everyone believes that the dollar has value. But because of this, Baudrillard thinks that these symbolic orders are really sensitive to acts of what he calls symbolic exchange, explain that. Because they are not based in real warrants. They're based in very arbitrarily power-held warrants. And if that is the case, then it seems to say that the ways that we can say symbolically erode at these paradoxes that uphold the symbolic order, maybe we can create some glimpses of truth or create some glimpses of a sense of objectivity away from power, and maybe we can engage the real. The general argument as to why we would want to engage the real in the first place is pretty similar to, say, maybe Nozick's experience machine example that says, yes, we want to maximize utility, but would you say put yourself in a machine that would give you maximum utility over sort of an artificially seeming extended period of time, or would you rather live your real life, right, with suffering, but it's authentic? Just remember, in K-debate, authenticity first. We don't want any of that fake shit. So, to conclude hyperreality, late-stage capitalism is really bad for meaning, and where I said we have more and more information, less and less meaning, capitalism is able to kick into gear here. We can look through things like media empires, which are extremely profitable, and make money off of literally proliferating information with spins and skews on it, not aimed for objectivity, but aimed for just saying as many words as fucking possible to fill up news time, to get ratings. So this sort of consumerist demand that obfuscates our view of the truth and meaning is very pernicious to Baudrillard, makes media a lot. And other things are like, say, the golden arches, right, for McDonald's, right? It's literally the letter M, right? If you think of the letter M in the abstract, you think of what? An alphabetic letter. If you see the letter M in just a certain symbolic context, you immediately associate with the entire chain of fast food. The argument that Baudrillard's making is that these symbols change our impressions of very basic signs that we have and load them with extra meaning that make the world harder and harder to interpret with the illusion that we're interpreting it very accurately. And so, any sign that we create is attempting to simulate what Plato called the simulacrum of an object, the simulacrum of an object being its essence. If we lived in the real, all we would know is simulacrum. But sometimes we also simulate nothing at all, nothing that's based in the real at all. I think one example of this is like, there's a movie called The Swarm, and I read a paper once about how the bees in this movie called The Swarm are simulacrum. The reason why is that they go and they sting people, and the people hallucinate that they're seeing giant bees instead of the tiny bees that stung them in the first place. That's why it's called The Swarm. The argument is that this is simulated off of absolutely nothing, because we have no conceptions of bees that make us hallucinate into thinking that there are giant bees around. You've just simply used like an object conduit that you could have described by any other bug term, and just conflated a concept and superimposed on an object. So, yeah, there's that. So, yeah, that's hyperreality. So, symbolic exchange was just a theory or a framework that Baudrillard observed in history and also observed theoretically of exchanges that can be made outside of capitalism for goods and actions that are exchanged for wholly symbolic purposes. What I mean by this is like, say I'm a salesman and I sell you a product, right? That product probably has some intrinsic value in it, right? It does things. We value it, right? There's labor that went into making it, right? But that's bad for exchanges. So we start giving things like that to people, they incur debts because there's always implicit value associated with them. And the sort of motors and churns of capitalism are able to kick in the gear when we start making those exchanges because they're able to approximate things like exchange value, use value onto those objects. So even if you're just giving, say, a gift to someone, it incurs a sort of psychological or latent psychoanalytic debt, even, maybe. It forces people to want to commit these sort of capital exchanges, right? Of sort of fairness, right? Of exchange capital and value, right? Baudrillard's arguments that's arbitrary. And instead, these are sort of symbolic exchanges are also performative, because it is not the object that you're giving that is the source of value. It is the exchange itself, because the object you're giving is wholly symbolic. An example of this would be like, say you found a leaf, and the leaf really reminded you of a close friend of yours. And you said, wow, this leaf makes me feel so at home with my friend right now. You go up to your friend the next day and you give him that leaf, and you're like, this leaf made me think of you. That would be a symbolic exchange. Isn't that cute? See, Baudrillard's all about giving leaves to your friends. That's all you need to know. Non-capitalist societies often made these symbolic exchanges part of like traditions and things like that. Baudrillard says that this, if anything, this is probably closer to like an engagement with the real than anything else, because it recognizes the total arbitrariness of placing sign value into objects, right? So in our regular naming practice, we consider this like a wholly consistent thing that we do. We see a rock, we call it a rock. We move on. C'est la vie. But Baudrillard's like, wow, that was so arbitrary. Why is that rock a fucking rock? How did you make that determination? You have literally no justification for that whatsoever that you can even source. So, the issue for him was more so that when we just put totally symbolic value into exchanges, then we're just being like complete silly gooses and like being like clowns with like meaning exchange, and that's what he wants. Because he wants us to recognize the arbitrariness of meaning. And so, other things are, if you can artificially superimpose value onto an object, right? And then give it to someone, right? Say we have a symbolic exchange where you artificially put a value onto an object. But you putting that specific value onto an object is somewhat paradoxical. And you give it to someone, or an entity, that already has its own symbolic order. And that object, that specific value, makes no sense within that symbolic order at all. Baudrillard says that those are the things that sort of reverse outstanding ideological meaning and create some sort of notions of change, of challenging that ideology. The examples he uses in some instances are like terrorism. The spirit of terrorism talks about 9/11. He says that the death of the terrorists was their only stake. That they say gave their deaths a sort of symbolic value with the nature of their action. And in doing so, what they did was, in fighting U.S. state violence against their people, they killed themselves, which is the same thing that they're trying to stop. Their people being killed to stop that, which seems very paradoxical, right? Which seems to sort of act as a symbolic exchange that explains the conditions of the whole affairs in the first place, of people fighting back for their own people, but the only thing that comes out of that is just total mindless bloodshed, right? That symbolic exchange is to say that there's maybe some oppositional voice to be heard here, but all that concludes from any of this is just people dying. Whether, one side is right or the other, right? People may win their blows, but at the end of the day, the whole purpose of the entire cultural exchange in the first place is to kill people arbitrarily. And that becomes clear in the symbolic exchange. So now we're going to talk about Baudrillard and debate more strategic aspects of this. So first we're going to start with how not to read Baudrillard. Because there are many ways to read Baudrillard. I'm here to tell you how to not do it. Because I've had to judge Baudrillard a lot this year. I can tell you I've voted it down a lot this year. And these are the things I've voted down. First, the reading of Baudrillard is highly based in just like post-Marxist theory. His theory that's anti-capitalist. I don't think it's strategic to read. You should just read a Kapke instead, or like D&G. Because Baudrillard believes that the capitalist system is inertial. There's absolutely no way that we can actually meaningfully efface the system large enough that we would make it all decline on itself. Reverse the sins and evils of the system at large. If that's the case, a lot of his literature just says, well, there's nothing we can fucking do. That's why it's called radical nihilism. Pointless lectures. There's nothing you can do. The world's blowing up. We can't do anything about it. But when people read this in debate and they just say, oh, our alternative is to do nothing because the world's going to explode anyway, That's not a real argument. He's a sociologist. He observes that the world is dying. He does not say we should basket it. He does not say we should, take our fucking towel out and, try and, get a suntan in the middle of, Operation Desert Storm. That's not what he's saying. So if you just read the real impact turns, I think, to accelerationism that are good arguments, it's, really simple shit, too. They're literally saying, let's wait for the end of the world. You can be like, what happens during the end of the world? A lot of fucking bad things. That's what the alt is. Anything that they critique. So, meaning's really unstable. You'll be like, yeah, I'm sure when people are firing nukes everywhere at the end of capitalism, that meaning's going to be incredibly stable. That we'll understand the world really, really well at that point. No, that's not going to be the case. Everyone will be fucking confused. So, I don't think that's a good argument. There's also another argument generally called reversibility. This is more so coined by another secondary author called Andrew Robinson, which talks about generally his view of dialectical reasoning, saying that we should try to get rid of all binaries. I always thought this was an atrocious argument, and I also don't think it's what Baudrillard is saying, but Andrew Robinson seems to think it is the case. That Baudrillard wants to reverse any binary understanding of the world. That seems to make no sense, especially for someone who's a writer and regularly uses binary understanding to form a fucking sentence in the first place. And the reason for this is, and I always, when people read this argument against me, I made the same analytic turn every time. Won every single time on this analytic turn. I don't think there's an actual answer to this. I just asked them, I'd be like, so all binaries are bad? They're like, yeah. I'm like, so what about the binary between consent and non-consent that allows us to delineate things like rape that are important to understand when they occur? They're like, I don't know. Well, in the world of reverse binary understanding, then we just won't hurt each other. I'm like, I don't believe that. I don't think correcting our semiotic framing of the world is enough to stop all violence. So that's probably not a good argument either.
Did you ever beat that argument?
Yes, several times. Montgomery read it a fair bit. Where's Stefan? There he is. Yeah, no, Willie read this argument. It was bad. Don't read it.
No, I mean, did you ever beat the binary with consent?
Oh, no, because I never read reversibility.
Oh.
I only read semiotic arguments. And this is what I read. Debate nihilism. So, which is just a big extended fiatist illusory trick. So the argument made that debate obfuscates the real through us doing things that we might constitute as debate heroism, which is just us simulating political judgment through sort of a dogmatic praise of education, fairness, general liberal moralism. And so we demand to discuss an ad nauseum almost, to the point where you'll just have rounds of a Harvard Westlake kid and a Harvard kid. No offense to his personal schools, but I'm just see, these are the people who I see reading these positions strangely. To two white kids from Harvard and Harvard Westlake and around talking about intimate, white boys from talking about intimate partner violence, and they're like, yeah, this is really important. And it's you don't care about this one, probably. 2, you have very little empirical engagement with this. 3, you have no clue what the fuck you're talking about. 4, these arguments are totally unwarranted. It's just very strange environments that ultimately sort of beg the question, are people doing this because they actually care about the issues, or are they doing it because roll and balance and structural violence apps are an easy way to pick up balance curriculums? And so the argument is just that you aren't actually doing anything to help these people. Instead, this is sort of a replication of what Baudrillard says media empires do by taking the narratives and images of people suffering in the third world and projecting them for us. Maybe doing something very small and parsley, oh, we helped this one person in Africa get a house. It's what about all the other people there who need houses? What about them? No. We couldn't help them with all the trillions of dollars of mass disproportionate wealth that we have stockpiled in the West. We can only do this one house. And so we get a sort of self-moralism out of sort of paltry exchanges that make us look good, when we're probably also the entity that's producing these structural inequalities in the first place. Baudrillard says this is just part of a system that sustains those structural inequalities globally by creating this sort of sentiment or belief that we are actually doing something good, despite this backdrop. And that the real clincher here is that in debate, because we do fiat these things, nothing really does happen at the end round. No one is saved. Just because you talked about it, and said that, like, oh, we act like policymakers, so we're going to learn how to do this in the real world, does not mean that actually occurs, right? The judge seemingly has no obligation to vote for us, even if they're not a person. There's a few arguments made here. First one is one about suffering commodification. Just sort of what I've been saying. Just that we use images of suffering as a form of complex, not complex, but rather regularized, traditionalized symbolic exchange. This would be framed as a more capitalist symbolic exchange because there is an intrinsic value to those narratives, right? The speaking of people who have been suffering offers us great, import as to how we can, say, make the world better in material terms, right? But because of that value, that then gets simulated and extrapolated, right, and reduced and degraded into the capitalist exchanges of those narratives, which are based off of their use value, i.e. winning debate rounds, and their exchange value, i.e. they give us some point of ground to discuss. The argument for the symbolic exchange against that would be to say, well, we should recognize that when we talk about these people, right, those are just simulations of actual people, right? And if it is the case, then the symbolic exchange would be to say, do something like vote neg. Because here's the thing, voting for someone is very easy to pass off as a symbolic exchange. Even though the ballot maybe has, like, some may argue, like, the intrinsic value if it wins the debate round, right? One can also say that we don't really find that because, say if a judge gives you, like votes for you, you're not in debt to that judge, right? They just, like, fulfilled their adjudicating role in that round. You can completely sever the judge to a certain extent from their personhood in that regard, in terms of just, like, at the end of the round, the judge will decide who gets the ballot. So it's not intrinsic value in that sense that you knew someone was going to get in the first place. So the judge giving you a ballot is sort of them just, like, recognizing a sentiment, right? They recognize a sentiment that's countenanced by the one I see, then it seems to be a good reason to vote neg. I also wrote an article about this. Yeah.
In regards to a topic like this one, where it doesn't actually ask you to fiat anything, does the proclamation of a moral statement itself, that like hinges on like affirmatives that talk about like eugenics, people of color, stuff like that, would that link back into Baudrillard or no?
So I think it all depends on framing. Okay. So like for example, you have this issue on this topic where I agree, yes, it is a moral statement. Yeah, it doesn't have like the same fiat burdens, and I don't think Baudrillard has as much ground. In fact, I think Baudrillard affirms on this topic. I'm trying to write that right now, but I think that if say someone read or attempted and theoretically justified, say, like a plan on this topic, and then read it with, like, say, a rolled about it the same way, then you can still critique their framing. You can even say that, like, oh, you went out of your way to, like, put this framing on a topic where it doesn't even make sense, just so you can get your, like, moralized ballots, I think, even. But I think if it's just, like, a truth-testing argument or something of that sort, then there generally aren't a lot of, like, strong links for Baudrillard. Like, when people read, say, like, Frick's against me and things of that nature, I very rarely read. This is just, I don't use a lot of good links. I think Baudrillard most specifically links to structural violence and util best, and probably most clear sense. Because I think those are most accurately referential to, like, say, how our current political system works. I think it's probably pretty utilitarian, and we can say that the influence of structural violence is just general liberal principles, right? That we would see maybe, like, progressive policies every once in a while, so we can understand as a function of politics. I think the question of getting links for Baudrillard is just trying to find cases that are actually mirroring and sort of reminiscent of the world as it stands. So you can just say, portray the app as part and parcel of what Baudrillard's critique is. But, I mean, as far as, like, if, say, someone read a Contaft, right? Like, yeah, Baudrillard critiques Enlightenment rationality, but not, like, say, to the same extent of someone like of, like, Deleuze, right? Deleuze in-depthly argues against that. I just think it's, like, a matter of choice, and you need to be smarter to, say, read something else for, like, say, the decay debater who's interested in these arguments. Treat something against, like, something like Deleuze against framework arguments. But I think Baudrillard is probably the best answer to policy-making arguments. Does that answer your question? Okay. Another good argument for Baudrillard. And this is also sometimes where Baudrillard goes into some forays with psychoanalysis, and some people have written about him in a Lacanian sense. But he argues that power in society, in American society at the very least, power in American society uses a large-scale social fear of biological death, or the events of biological death, to sustain institutions, and also facilitate things like threat construction that we proliferate. Oh, you want to extend your life. Oh, you want to live longer. This topic. And then we say that that's good, intrinsically good. Why is that good? Probably because in market systems, in capitalism, the only bodies that are productive are ones that are alive. And also we have a very base fear of death, because even though we're in a strange, phenomenal world that we can't interpret at all, and so we just adopt false meaning to interpret it in the first place, we still don't want to die, because that seems to be the only thing that we have a strong source of understanding over our own mortality. It seems to be some sort of objective truth that sustains our life together. The fact that we are alive in the first place, we'll die at some point. He seems to be the sandwich of our life in the first place, and the truth that holds us together, with us not being able to interpret anything in the middle. And so, we are scared of death. But just this is wholly artificial. Like, the notion to be scared of biological death is arbitrary in the first place to him, given the fact that, like, oh, we die, our molecules will just go and become something else. We've already always already been something else in the first place, that the atoms that comprise and make our being have already gone and made other things in the first place. Life is just a matter of fluxes and flows, and matter rearranging itself in sort of coincidental ways. So he has a very posh French way of being like, death, don't care about it. Also, but there's a social role here, because we often mark certain bodies in society or certain groups as being intrinsically dangerous. For example, for one author, like Curry talks a lot about how we mark black men as intrinsically dangerous or criminal. This ultimately, to the Baudrillardian thinker, is that we understand social relations based off of these sort of underlying fears. This is a psychoanalytic argument for Baudrillard. And that the reason why social relations occur in sort of violent or disproportionate ways is because we identify certain aspects of lack of understanding or lack of meaning within certain bodies that have been associated with them. As in, we don't understand blackness. It's a completely different subjectivity from ours. Say, anyone who's not black. And so the social order, it sort of says, well, we should be scared of that. Because if we don't understand it, then it's something we should be scared of. Society is a process of adopting shared meanings based off of relative fear. Obviously, black people are not scared of black people because they're black. So they aren't going to pick up a bunch of horseshit that says that they're dangerous. But if you're a white person in suburbia who watches a lot of Fox News, yeah, you probably will. So this ultimately facilitates a lot of social violence, because we literally view people as like the Grim Reaper walking around on a like underlying sociological level, which probably explains a lot of violence. And yeah, so there's a guy named Christopher Peterson who writes an article on this and just says, like, I always had this evidence in my return ask if I thought I was going to hit a blackness studies-based position. The argument is just a root cause claim. It's just a psychoanalytic argument that says that slavery as a foundational condition came out of the desire of like rich whites in the South to displace the notion of death from their imaginary and put them on the black people. And also for obvious productivity purposes in slavery and capitalism. And so things all glued together for Baudrillard. So the alternative that I always thought was smart to use, because here's the thing, Baudrillard is a sociologist, so he doesn't give prescriptions, he only gives analysis. But in the last chapter of Simulacrum Simulation, he he described when he was writing the book that like he often felt like he was going like crazy at certain points because like some of the revelations within it, he was just like, wow, this is really fucking depressing. And so he had a hard time writing the book. And so the last chapter was just like, so here's how I've dealt with writing all of this. And it's more or less him just being like, when we try and use meaning to make a point about our lack of ability to use meaning properly, we always sort of fail on ourselves, right? We're trying to make a cake out of broken glass. That's not going to work. He says that we live in an era of events without consequences, which is to say that we have all these events that have meaning to us. We recognize the critical implications of them. We try and do something about it, and the world is not armed in such a way or it's not malleable enough for us to create real change. Is too inertially pointed towards its fixed end or teleological end of capitalism, with big explosions. And so the round also is sort of an event without a consequence. We vote for one side, nothing happens, we move on, we have changed impressions. All these things affect our notion of meaning, but nothing meaningful comes from them. And so voting neg is sort of recognizing that we are politically disaffected, that the notion of the 1AC adhering to a notion of us saying like, oh, this is a great space to talk about politics. No, it's not a great space to talk about politics. Most of the judges are dumbasses and no one knows what the fuck their cards say. Like, what do you mean this is a great place to feel like we're super political? If everyone was like, I mean, I think honestly at this point, like, this is actually kind of representative of Congress, but like, in terms of like, competency, but like, we would think that we hold ourselves to a higher standard if we thought that we were going to be policymakers. But the evidence in this last chapter, he also talks about how if you're saying like breaking really serious news to someone, right, and you have a really stone cold face, and you're like telling them how someone say like really important died or something like that, and then halfway through explaining it to them, you just kind of like sheepishly smile at them like, oh. They'd be like, well, what does that mean? Is bad news actually true or not? Are you just fucking with me, or are you actually just sadistic, right? The argument is that the critique is that sort of like strange sadistic smile that's like, everything's fucked up. And so the argument is just that, well, you can't do anything about it. You don't have to endorse it, but like, also don't feel like you're solving anything either. It's just a very realistic critique. It's just like, things suck. Ah! That's really the thesis. But yeah, and I think, but also more importantly, more substantively, that sort of logic of like, we can engage in a serious debate, right? We could act like something's occurring here, right? I could read a standard 1 NC. I'm choosing not to do that. Instead, we walked into the context of seemingly, we thought these procedurals were going to occur in the first place. I chose to smile instead. Because when I smile, the procedurals look silly, and that begs the question of why. Another alternative that's not nihilism, I think is less so an alternative that's good, but more so is like a framing for chaos that Jean Baudrillard is this notion of hostage taking. He talks about a lot of examples, like in the Turkish hostage taking situations, stole a bunch of politicians, and held them hostage in like a mall. And it was just in the middle of like consumerist settings, like there's just too many people, like there's nothing the government can do about this scenario. So in this way, two very politically disaffected people were able to get hold and like seize immense political power in that moment. This is a sort of symbolic exchange, whereby an action that seemingly has no intrinsic value, right, we are able to produce great value. Also, the point of the terrorists, always in these situations, he points out, is to point out state violence. And they always respond to these situations not by negotiating with terrorists, but by lashing out on them and cracking down on them with violence, until the hostage-taking started smart enough where they have to respond to them with discourse and refuse the discourse that they've had in the past. So, like, when George Bush says in the War on Terror, we don't negotiate with terrorists, well, if Osama bin Laden had kidnapped George W. Bush, we probably would have negotiated with some fucking terrorists. Because we wouldn't have let them kidnap the President of the United States. Like, you can't just let ISIS, like, pull, like, a Steven Spielberg movie or something on you. Like, that doesn't work. The argument is that these hostage takings are a form of symbolic exchange that gives a gift that the symbolic order cannot make coherence of. Does not make sense. The fact that they would, say, procedurally have to respond to the situation with violence, but the point of their complaint is that the state's being violent, they have to paradoxically, seemingly affirm their statement in that instance. That's why I always read this as an app, and so when people were like, oh, we're going to read T against this, I'd be like, that's the system striking me down with the same violence I just critiqued for 6 minutes. And so the entire app is like a T impact turn, but doesn't affirm the topic. See how that works? They have to read T in the 1 NC, you impact turn T for 6 minutes. It's a really great combination. Da-da-da. Because then they'll be like, they'll make arguments about engagement. I have to read something substantive in the 1 NC. No! You fucked up. You should have read 7 minutes of T. Because we're going to take that short 2-minute shell and impact turn it for 4 minutes in the 1 AR. See how this works? You're just trying to change the 1 NC strategy, but it's already been turned, and they don't realize it because all the cards are filled with fuck nonsense words that only you can reinterpret in the 1 AR. It's fucking great. Roll a ballot. I don't think you need one. I don't think you should use one. It doesn't make sense. The whole point of the argument is that when we exchange, have symbolic exchanges, which is what the roll a ballot asks for, it asks for some sort of content so we can exchange that for a ballot. So why would you have one? You don't need one. That's kind of the point. Your alternative should explain every single reason as to why they should vote for you. I often had like an analytic block of text. I was just like, there's no roll of the ballot. Fuck a roll of the ballot. Vote for me in political solidarity. We've already undermined all the epistemological warrants of the 1AC. Why would you vote for them in the first place? It's kind of a presumption argument, also. Because you can just extend your links and then presumption. So the notion here is that you're ultimately probably critiquing some sort of framing they've endorsed on a pre-fiat level with the critique. So if you turn that, right, that just seems to be saying that they're debating badly. So you should vote them down. This is kind of my personal opinion. Some people say that you do need a pre-fiat framing to justify these arguments. I just don't think so. It doesn't make sense to me. It seems to me if the 1AC is the point of stasis by which the round is decided, the K is just sort of a straight term of that. And it's not like they can pick a new advocacy in the 1AR that would get out of all of your arguments. So I don't really know why this isn't sufficient reason to vote for it. Yeah.
Would it be best to run Baudrillard as a one-off strategy rather than running Baudrillard with, let's say, 2 dissats, because the dissats themselves operate
don't read util arguments with Baudrillard.
Okay. Or even structural violence fiated position.
No. Unless you're reading his condo and you just want to be cheeky. And you think you can win that theory today, sure. But, I think that I usually read Baudrillard as one-off with a lot of case turns. But usually, but also there are situations where you can read 2 off of Baudrillard. At the TOC, against IPV on handguns, my strategy as an egg was always 2 off Baudrillard and inherency, because I didn't think the app was inherent. And I think procedural issues like inherency, which are norms of debate, which you're critiquing norms of debate, but you're not critiquing all the norms of debate, right? You don't critique speech times. That's the worst answer to this position, by the way. When people are like, oh, we're critiquing standard procedurals, and then you're like, well, what about speech times, right? Well, the 1AC or 1NC followed speech time, so obviously I think they're well justified, right? I think that, say, if you can justify something like inherency, which probably makes a lot of sense, right? Then those arguments you can read with Baudrillard. But because it is sort of a pessimistic position that undermines a lot of the assumptions of debate in the first place, it is hard to read other positions with it. And policy, I've even seen a post-fiat version of this, where you just say say you're just suffering commodification, right? Just the suffering commodification arguments, and that you should reject them because they say, dehumanize those who give narratives in the first place, and then read that with a T-shell. Because you still think it's going to be topical, right? As a neg, you can read Baudrillard and still think it's okay to be topical. Or good to be topical, right? So, say the plan is very generic, but is, say something that links that, you could read Baudrillard and be like, oh, but also you're not topical. Because at that point, you aren't reading the sections of Baudrillard that are really critiquing debate in depth. You can also read Nair 99 as a role of the ballot. It's about discourse authenticity and just says that micropolitics is good, which is what I see. Really quickly, AF response to Baudrillard. 1. Defend your politics by saying also that the AF is an instance of pragmatic disruption because the AF is by some way some sort of critical point of changing an actual social issue, and that's a net benefit to the permutation. 2. The alt does not solve ever make solving matter, because in the framing of the Baudrillard critique, they don't think solving matters, right? They are just fine with the world blowing up. Say that the world blowing up is bad, and then say that all of their arguments are non-unique. 3, read materialism good / Baudrillard's an ivory tower, so like fuck terms and all that, because then you're also treating substantive arguments and also the framing of the arguments in the first place for the debate, because if you're like, oh, debate's bad, and then they're like, you're just ivory tower, you're worse than debate. 4, watch out for floating pick, because they always go for it, but also you can make abusive time frame terms because they're probably indite theory in the 1NC or 1AC, one NC. So then make terms like do the AF and then the alt, or do the alt and then the AF, which is usually severance because it's a time frame term, but they're not going to read theory. Baudrillard debaters never read theory. 5, impact turn these inertia-based acceleration into some alternatives. They're literally asking for like anarcho-capitalism at best and like the end of the world at worst. 6, go for risk of offense, and paradigmatic rejection means let the AF weigh the case. That means that if the critique is saying that we should reject the AF on a paradigmatic issue like roll the ballots, you should still weigh the substantive parts of the case because they're completely separate from those issues against it. 7, the simulacrum term, which is an argument that says that yes, Baudrillard's critique is true, but it's incredibly totalizing and completely impossible to break out. So we should accept the fact that the AF is probably a simulacrum, but it's a good simulacrum, and that there are good and bad simulacrum. We should accept the good ones. 8, you can do what we do. Read Skep affirms of the AF, then trigger Skep off of Baudrillard because his metaphysics says that indeterminacy is the only thing that is stagnant in the world, which just means that epistemic skepticism is true because of this shit. So then you can just be like Skep affirms. You conceded the Skep trigger. We always thought that that was a cheeky way to answer it. He did that against Grant when he read Baudrillard. Negative responses to Baudrillard asks. 1, read materialist critiques. I always thought the answer was really smart. Don't read Marxist arguments, because Baudrillard is actually a Marxist. 2, hold the line. Just read a really long framework argument saying you must refer to resolution, because they probably don't refer to resolution. Even if they say they refer to resolution, they don't actually refer to resolution. They don't defend implementation. They at least make them defend implementation. Don't read a short shell, because they'll just like turn the hell out of it, the way they are. 3, you can read Anti-Politics, the Box 99 Evidence, the COG Classic. It's just like, oh, if you're apathetic, then what's going to happen to politics? The alt-right's going to take over, the world's going to be bad. We don't want that. You can take a good picture, that's what. Also, the Gulf War, yeah, it did happen. The argument was just that since it was a heavily air-based war, we didn't actually know anything about it, and the news never told us anything about the 10,000, at least, Iraqi people that died in that war. So we had no perception of what the actual conflict was. So even though we called it a war, were given no information that told us it was a war in the first place, even though there was actually a war occurring. So really, it's just a genocide masquerading as a war. So that's the argument. Yeah, so I feel like I haven't explained any of Baudrillard, because he says a lot of things. You should go read his books. If you want to hear a funny story about him, ask me about the Turing test. Also watch Michigan KM, who's the college policy team, to understand Baudrillard debate. Here are some citations. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Sean.
Can you go to the magnets page?
Yeah, one second. You want to take the slides?
John again.